guys, welcome to The Disruptors, the show where we get the folks focused on building a bigger, better future. And today we got two people focused on doing that with a ton of money behind them to make it happen. We've got Filipp and Polina. Let's try it. Chebotarev on the program from Cambridge Companies. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So we were talking a little before the program. You guys raised a ton of money to get into essentially private equity on the real estate side of things and then found a different passion in life. What's your story? What's the quick 30,000-foot overview?
Yeah. So prior to 2010, Polina and I both had corporate jobs. We both quit our jobs at the end of 2010 and started raising capital to make distressed real estate acquisitions. And over a 5-year period, we ended up raising $350 million of equity, bought 44 distressed real estate assets. And as we started exiting those and real estate prices started recovering, we started looking at other sectors. And where our passion was disrupting consumer products. So we knew that 40% of all customers today are millennials. We know that millennials are 4 times less likely to buy from multinationals than baby boomers. And so the way that millennials shop, the way that they entertain themselves, and all these different aspects of life, the way that they spend their money, basically, is very different than prior generations. And so our thesis at that time was to monetize that generational shift in spending. And so we made our first investment in a fast growth company called Foodsters, which is an organic, basically think Hostess, but lower sugar and organic, with Sarah Michelle Gellar as one of the co-founders, and helped that business take off. We then invested in a baby food company called Once Upon a Farm. We helped bring in Jennifer Garner as a partner and investor and co-founder into that company. And that company has had over 20x revenue growth since 2017. And since then, we've made over 24 investments in everything from nutritional supplements,
Organic feminine care, pet food, nutritional bars, beverages, all better for you, consumer.
Yep. And our thesis is it has to be better for you. Like it can't have artificial ingredients, products that cut corners. So on the product side, it really has to add value to the consumer.
And you said hosted without the garbage, hostess without the garbage. I'm curious, how do you do something like that? It's so counterintuitive when you look at those packages.
Sure. Well, and so what's the difference between a traditional kind of legacy product, which over the last 50 years has been engineered to be mass produced, margin optimized, which means you're using, low quality ingredients. What Foodsters does is, so they only use organic ingredients. They use identity preserved flour, fair trade cocoa, biodynamic sugar, so biodynamic is the step above organic, whereas it really not just focuses on not using pesticides or genetically modified ingredients. It also focuses on the sustainability of the farming methods. So really curating the highest quality ingredients that our earth provides and making lower sugar, higher nutritional content products that still taste really good in that brand.
How do we do something like that on a scale where we can start to reach more people? You kind of run into a problem when you're dealing with most high-end or most health products where they're awesome and incredible for you, and you have one of two problems. They're either incredibly expensive and most consumers can't afford them, or they're incredibly good for you, but they're not phenomenal for the environment. How do we start to move towards a world where we have a better win-win synergistic type? I imagine that's what you guys are trying to build towards.
Yes. So it's been going there. So organic certification really came out in 2004, like USDA organic. And at that time, organic products, it was very niche, very specialty. Very few retailers carried them. And the reason was because it was just priced too high. right? The cost of a conventional product was here and organic was here. It was only accessible to, either the health nuts, right, the fanatics, or people of very high income that could afford these luxury goods. Today, that's very different, right? Retailers like Whole Foods and Sprouts are, on par with a Kroger, Albertsons, Safeway as far as accessibility. And the price points between the better products versus the conventional products has come down. And so there is a price sensitivity diminishment for better for you food and beverage brands that deal with daily routine items. So when we talk about our investments, we're trying to invest in products that can be used often, so like either every day or at least every week versus every season or every occasion. Because consumers, what we've noticed, will start making smaller upgrades to their daily routine versus large upgrades, right? So if a consumer wants to upgrade, the zip code that they live in, or the kind of car they drive, or the school that they send their kids to,
that's going to be expensive.
Right. Those are expensive upgrades.
But it's much easier to do it with a coffee or a bar or milk.
Right.
Yeah, if you're avoiding small amount of negative things on a daily basis, it adds up over time, essentially.
Well, I think also today's consumer has seen the older generation spend so much money on healthcare. So they're like, well, we'd rather pay for it up front than on the back end, because you can preserve your health with what you put into your body.
And we just know too much now, right? We have all the media. Everybody has a smartphone. The latest health documentary on Netflix or Amazon Prime. We just have access to more information than just, marketing materials during cartoons, from 10, 15 years ago.
So why food tech? Why did you guys get so passionate about that? You brought up initially kind of the access point and that it was mainly health nuts getting into it. Were you guys the health nuts? What's your story? And you guys are brother and sister. What's it like building a business as a team?
Yes, we are health nuts, no sugar, trying to eat more plant-based. We work out 5 days a week, hike, and where are the today's?
We saw the trends that are very prevalent now as very qualitatively as consumers, and having a background in private equity, right? We just basically started researching it and learning more and realized that there's a big opportunity to invest in this space, because ultimately it's the consumer, right? It's the end user, the person that wants these products but didn't have access to these products, that's going to drive whether or not that product is successful, right? It doesn't matter how much money you have, what the product is, who the team is, if the customer doesn't want to buy the product, right? If the customer does want to buy the product, and we're talking about items like Vive Organics, for example, which is an organic wellness shot, went from $70,000 a month in revenue to close to $1 million a month in revenue in about a year period. Consumers wanted that product, right? They voted with their dollar. So, yeah, ultimately it's about finding the white space and investing behind products that fill that white space.
And scaling them so they're available to everybody, not just the niche groups.
Exactly, and that's a big part. That's almost the hardest part. You guys are really in the impact investing space, and I think a big part of that scale up is the money that's coming in. And there's traditionally not been a ton of money in the food tech space and in the health tech space. How have you seen that change lately?
So you're right. Last year, out of $100 billion of venture capital dollars invested, less than 4% went to consumer products. And even a smaller percentage of that went in for better for you, early stage consumer products. The rest went into technology and healthcare.
Life sciences, medical.
Yep. But when you look at the U.S. economy, 70% of the economy is consumer driven. Now, it's not all consumer products. You're talking about cars, you're talking about homes, but consumer products themselves make up 20% of the GDP. So the space is grossly underserved from an investment standpoint, right? And then you have this generation, millennials, quickly becoming the largest consumer spending group. So from an investment standpoint, there's a lot of opportunity because not a lot of groups are investing in this space. And then what you said about making it accessible, that's a huge challenge also. So in one of our investments, a baby food company called Once Upon a Farm. So when we first invested, it was very expensive, double the price of a conventional product, fresh. So it had 120, still does, has 120-day shelf life. And because of where it's priced, it was really doing well in dense metropolitan areas where the average incomes were higher. But retailers that were in lower income demographic areas were not really excited about taking on the product because they thought their customers wouldn't be able to afford it. And they were right. Over the last year, John Foraker, who's the CEO of the company and the team, really went through all the painstaking work to get the product certified by WIC, which is Women's and Children's Assistance. And now families of all income demographics can use WIC to purchase Once Upon a Farm, which is the highest quality baby food on the market. And the company's obviously gotten a lot of attention and praise for that nationally, but that move wasn't necessarily the move that was going to make the most money for the company that year, but it was the right move, right? So it's about balancing.
And it was essential for what they stand for,
How do you balance that with LPs? So a big issue that I've seen is most money's not going into this space because this space isn't the space with the exponential returns. It's the space where you can have incrementally awesome returns over time, but you're not going to hit 1,000x Facebook, a 10,000x Uber, because good luck doing that with something physical. It grows.
So it's you're right. When you look at just all companies in general, it's less than 0.1% of companies will reach $1 billion valuation. So whether you're in consumer, right, and Kind Bar sold 50% of itself to Mars in 2017 for $2 billion. You have Buy that sold for $1.7 billion. So you have, multi-billion-dollar companies in this space, just like you have multi-billion-dollar tech companies. But no matter what space you're in, it's 0.1% chance that the company that you're invested in is going to reach $1 billion valuation or higher.
But there is more activity in the food and beverage space on the sell side. Some of them are just not glamorized or talked about because they're not, $1 billion sale. So
they're still solid acquisitions. It's just one of the challenges I've seen. What are your thoughts about lab-grown meat or clean meat and to the movement that we're seeing now to move away from traditional animal agriculture, both with Beyond Burger type deal and then the stuff that we're growing ourselves in a lab?
So, I have opinions.
Controversial opinions.
No, I don't think it's controversial.
I think it's something that should be addressed because, it's not sustainable long term to cultivate, to grow, to have cattle just to raise. Yeah. But the thing is, the current offerings like Beyond Meat or Impossible Burger, they're not necessarily the healthiest alternative.
Yeah, especially the ones that use soy for protein.
Right, correct. So
instead of GMO soy, which is filled with glyphosate. But there's no question. So I think
it's going to get better, though. There's going to be a lot of innovation. Well, there is a lot of innovation.
What about on the actual lab-grown side? So cultured cells, taking existing protein or existing muscle cells from a cow, from a chicken, etc., and then extrapolating those out further in a similar to a yeast or a beer brewing type process. Those I think are very
I would love
promising.
to try it. I haven't tried one yet.
Yeah,
Have you?
I haven't eaten one personally, so
That would be interesting.
but it's all forecasts are showing that basically beef consumption is going to decline. I mean, I read one study that said by 2050 there'll be 50% less cows being raised for meat, which is a huge decline in beef consumption, right? I know there's a lot of companies that are growing cells both on beef, chicken, as well as seafood. It would be interesting to see where that goes. I think today, right, it may seem like a stretch that U.S. consumers will love. We may be, right,
It might be weird to
our
eat meat.
kids or our grandkids may be thinking, how come you were so weird, right? I think that's what where the change is going to be. I think things that we perceive weird today are going to seem very normal tomorrow, and what we're doing today with unsustainable, agriculture is going to seem like we were crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially just considering having to take something out back and shoot it to have dinner. I imagine in 20 years that will seem incredibly outdated.
Yeah, for sure.
So we talked a bit about founders making decisions that aren't necessarily in the best purely economic interest of the company. How do you think about the best way to generate impact on the world? There's starting a conventional business, there's B Corps, there's charities, there's volunteering. There's a lot of different models to go about impacting change. What are your thoughts in terms of looking at them both on an impact and an investment perspective?
Well, I mean, I think that a lot of the brands that we are personally investing in, just the product itself is already making an impact on the health of the consumer. Some of them have a lot more social missions attached to them, but like sustainable farming. But for the most part, the product itself is disrupting the legacy brand's version of what they're eating.
Are you doing mostly D2C, direct to consumer?
No, it's omni-channel.
Yeah.
Yeah, so our brands sell DTC, but also in retail. And we like omni-channel over just purely retail or purely DTC. I think that, right, it's super important for us and for the brands that we're investing in to make an impact. But the balance there is, right, in order to make that impact, the business has to make money, right? It has to have strong margins. That margin allows you to reinvest. And one of the areas of reinvestment, right, is this giving back. So it has to be balanced, because if it's not balanced, right, if you go out with just this outlook of we have to give back, we have to do good, but you don't have a sustainable business model behind that, you're going to run out of money very quickly, and you're not going to be able to give away for long. Yeah.
And that was why I was interested in having you guys on, because I think the businesses that are able to bake good into their actual product delivery are the best ones, because then they're making money while making the change.
And it really connects with the consumers. I think the consumers now are more demanding, and they want to see that, they want to feel connected to their brand.
What are some of the big lessons you guys have learned? You've worked with a decent number of companies to date.
So many.
On the brand side, like mistakes that they've made,
mistakes they've made, lessons that have been beneficial, things that you pass around between the companies because it seems to work well for everybody.
I mean, yeah, unfortunately, some brands that we know raised at too high of a valuation, and at some point they couldn't go further and they had to shut down. They tried to do a down round and then they couldn't. And unfortunately, some really good products are no longer available because they're no longer operational.
Yeah. I mean, we've seen obviously every single situation you could imagine at this point. We've seen brands become extremely successful and cash flow positive, and we've seen brands struggle. We've seen brands struggle, have a down year, and then bounce back up.
But what would be the biggest mistakes you've seen?
I think
like failures, basically.
Well, no. I think the biggest mistake, at least in a venture-backed, right, or investment-backed business, would be setting unrealistic expectations on valuation, but also not accounting for burns. I think the biggest topic of 2019 is reducing the burn rate and focusing on profitability versus growing top line at all costs. That is the biggest theme in investment of the year because of debacles like WeWork and Uber, right? That grew tremendously, but this happens. But this has been an issue all across the board, all the way down to very small companies, where we've been told for so long in the space that grow at all costs. We'll figure out the unit economics later. As long as you capture market share, that's what's going to drive your enterprise value, your valuation. But ultimately, right, the music stops somewhere, because if you're not going to make money or your unit economics aren't sound, no matter even the $100 billion vision fund, it's not enough money to burn forever, right? So ultimately, you got to figure it out. And I think that's the biggest lesson of 2019 is it's not all about top line at all costs, right? It's that measured approach of growing top line, but also watching the bottom line.
Absolutely. I can sell 50 cents for $1 all day long, and very soon I'm running out of those dollars. It's not the best deal. So you brought up GMOs and glyphosate earlier, and I want to play the flip side or the devil's advocate. Explain a little bit more about the glyphosate deal in terms of why that's negative, and then also from the perspective of most of the people that are using GMOs for farming would be in developing or third world countries. They're farmers there trying to get by. It's not necessarily that they're doing that because they want to do that. They're doing that because business wise or survival wise, that's what works.
Yep. So that's a good argument, and that's the argument that these companies like Monsanto and others used, right, in order to develop genetically modified products. It was all meant to drive yield. Yeah. So these genetically modified crops, they're modified to withstand different temperatures. They're modified to withstand higher doses of pesticides. And therefore, right, they grow bigger, they grow healthier, bugs don't eat them, and farmers have more product to sell. But that, right, sounds good in theory. When you look at hunger rates in the world, right, the GMOs were supposed to feed the world. People are still going hungry. Food is still being wasted because where it's produced versus where it's needed is there's a discrepancy. And then you have all these different impacts, right? So spraying fields with more and more pesticide creates not just toxicity levels that then get passed on to humans, but also in the environment, right? As runoff in the water, it impacts wildlife. So there is a price to perceived abundance. And so one of the arguments is, right, there's intelligent design in everything, right? And a tomato was designed, right, by Mother Nature to be this certain way. And so messing with it so you can, right, pump it full of, spray it full of pesticides is not the way we all intend to function. I think with technology, though, and more sustainable farming methods, and I don't think we're there today, right? But I think over time, the goal is, right, to get to a cleaner, less chemical dependent way of farming.
I would definitely agree with that. I would say there's definitely not intelligent design in a tomato. So evolutionarily,
Well, in the DNA that creates a tomato. Like, why is a tomato a tomato? I mean, I'm just saying there's intelligent design in the way the world works. Maybe not specifically, right?
I just meant in terms of things evolved by trying things that didn't work and failing off. So what I'm trying to get to is
I just love tomatoes, so I thought that
I love tomatoes too. I'm going to put that out there. I know a lot of people are against, and I'm not against genetically modifying something. I'm against the pesticides that they're using because of it. Because based off of the science that I've seen, that's the real cause. So you brought up the glyphosate deal and also the soil erosion. Yeah, basically ruining your gut. That's what I've seen.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, and that's
and that's what a lot of people feel, and that's why it's driving.
Yeah, it's the pesticide is the biggest issue with GMOs.
It's basically, I mean, it's the cops get bulletproof armor and the gangsters get armor-piercing bullets. It's kind of an arms race, so to speak. How do we handle topic? Because even when you brought it up and you were kind of explaining it, there's challenges between getting the science out there and sounding woo-woo. So, for instance, we have an outbreak now of every disease because people aren't vaccinating their kids, and they're doing it not because of a good scientific reason, but because scientifically it sounds smart. How do we handle that? Because a lot of times those things are tied together in terms of the beliefs people have. A lot of people that believe GMOs are bad believe vaccinations are also bad. How do we disseminate good science to avoid bad outcomes?
I mean, there may be a correlation, right? Of people who think GMOs are bad also don't want to vaccinate their kids.
But the thing is, people were vaccinating for a lot longer than there's been these current pesticides used in the last 30 years that are now disrupting the gut. You know, people have been being vaccinated since 20s, 30s, and they were fine. It's only this last 20 years you can kind of link the
increase in chronic illness. Yeah, but I think as far as where we're investing in the kind of social missions, right, that our investment strategies aligned with, don't really cross into the vaccine world or pharmaceuticals, or it's just not our space.
I think
so.
Most people just need to do their own research. Yeah.
I would agree with you. It's just, at least in the U.S., if you tell me one belief someone has, I can name almost all the other beliefs they have, which is dangerous because we have this extremization where we associate with the in-group and we more or less align our beliefs to fit those of others because that's what we're seeing from our Facebook friends' posts, and that's what the algorithms are optimizing us towards. I think it's dangerous that we live in a world where it is so easy to explain away where it is so easy to have two separate groups with such dissimilar beliefs.
You're saying they're conformists.
I'm saying in a lot of ways most of the world seems like conformists of two different parties. Yeah. At least in the US.
We agree. I see that.
Yeah. That's true.
Speaking of the US, you guys both emigrated here from Russia quite a while ago with almost nothing. What was that like?
It was hard, but I mean, we came in 1993. We left everything behind, so we started here. Didn't speak any English, and just for the first 10 years had to adjust. And we went to school here, learned the language.
In Russia in the 90s, so the communism was falling. There were 6 political factions all struggling for power. There was violence, organized crime started to become very prevalent, corruption. And so it was that's why we left. Right. That's why our family made the choice to leave and flee. But going from that highly unstable political environment, very unsafe, a lot of uncertainty, to the U.S., which
was the promise of the American dream, was a much better alternative. And I think we're really happy that our parents brought us here because we are living that dream.
Yep. Well, and so I think what drives us to kind of always trying to be better, trying to improve, is knowing that sacrifice that our parents made. Our dad was in his 60s, our mom was in her 50s. They had friends, a whole life, careers there, and they sacrificed that all so their kids, Polina and I and our younger brother, can all have a better future, right? And be raised in a safer place.
But nothing was guaranteed. So we were really trying to, make them proud and make them feel like they did.
That it was worth it, right? That it was all worth it.
And I think it is.
Yeah.
Do you think if your parents tried to come today, they'd still be let in? What do you think about the changing dynamics and situations that's playing out, both immigration and then U.S.-Russia?
I think they would think that they're going to try to influence the elections, and they'd be like, no. No, I mean, it was a very unique time where, on our mom's side, her whole family has been here since the 80s. On our dad's side, are all, from Russia, but he's older. So they really helped us. So our mom's family helped us come over. They sponsored us, helped us get situated. So we had, help from family to do that.
I know I personally am worried about the isolationism that I see the U.S. having lately, especially considering something like 50% of most founders of Fortune 500, et cetera, are immigrants. What do we do about that? How do we, is there something we can do? Is that something, what are your thoughts?
I mean, on the political actions of the United States and the world?
Just preventing it from happening. We see a backlash against immigrants and immigration, despite the fact that they're the ones who are driving most of the change and innovation in the world, especially in the U.S.
So what I say to that is,
this country was founded on immigrants.
Look, I mean, I think that there's rhetoric, right, and at high levels of government or in media, right, that the U.S. is trying to protect its trade interests in China, or right, feuding with Russia, which has been happening for
forever,
decades and decades. I mean, I don't see what's happening now as anything new. But the sentiment that we see in the business community, whether we're in Los Angeles, in Chicago, in New York, or in Portland, Oregon, or right, smaller metropolitan areas, right? We don't see any discrimination or isolationism. I mean, we're Russian Jews in business. Nobody since we've been in business, not one person has said anything negative about the fact that we're Russian, or that they wouldn't do business with us because of our nationality or race or whatever. I mean, so we just don't see that in our dealings. Obviously, it exists, and obviously there's people that are gonna.
And that's probably because we came and we're productive and we're contributors back to the society.
Yeah,
it's kind of hard to criticize.
Yeah, and it could also be that, right. You seek out those who you are most connected with, and right, as open-minded people who want to be productive and do good in the world. We're not usually conversing or discussing or associating ourselves with people that are filled with hate in any sense. So it could be just right. But I think, it's always going to exist. There's always going to be people that are going to hate, unfortunately. And then there's always people that are going to be accepting and open-minded.
I would agree. I would say the one scary thing is that you mentioned associating with the people that you have similar beliefs to, and I think that that's what we've seen a lot of. Especially, around the world, you more or less have metropolitan cities which have a certain culture, feel, set of core values, and then you have the rural areas which have a more conservative set of core values that are kind of not aligning, and also equality kind of not matching anymore as progress and innovation seems to stem to the cities.
But I think social media is blurring those lines, and it'll continue to, right? Having access, so associating with people that are like-minded, used to be confined to your geography, and now it's less confined to, right, geographical proximity, which could be a good thing or a bad thing.
And most people that we associate with are in business anyway, so it's not just on like social.
Yeah.
So you guys run a little bit of an unconventional venture firm, so to speak. You're more of like a portfolio firm, is what it seems like, building up an e-commerce portfolio. What is your model exactly?
So we identify businesses. So 70% of the investments that we make are in companies that are 20 to 100 million in sales. And then 25% of the types of companies we invest in are companies that are less than 10 million in sales. And the reason for that is, so just statistically, less than 3% of companies will reach 10 million in revenue, and less than 1% of all startups will get to 20 million. So by having a larger allocation of funds to later stage companies, we're able to reduce the risk profile, but still have upside potential. And then when we can be very hands-on and very involved, we'll invest usually one company at a time that's earlier stage, that's below 10 million in sales, and really help use our capabilities, our relationships, not just capital, to help scale that business to milestones of 5 million, ultimately 10 million in revenue, ultimately 15, 20, et cetera, which obviously takes a lot more time. It's a lot riskier. But if it's done right, the valuation is much lower, and there's a lot of enterprise value that can be created versus paying a premium for that enterprise value once it's been created and the situation is more de-risked.
What about synergistic value? You guys have a PE background and you're basically building a perfect PE portfolio. Ever considered trying to merge companies together and create competitors to larger players?
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in our pet food business, True Pet, so it's in the process of acquiring its the third pet food company and going public. Yeah, and so there's synergies in that sense where, right, you can put several snack brands together and have back-end accounting be the same, or have the same sales team sell all products. But there's also synergy in products that aren't necessarily in the same category. So for example, every year we host a founder party for all the executives and founders, leadership teams of our portfolio companies, because ultimately, right, all these brands are all looking for the same thing. They're looking, right, they're sharing marketing techniques, they're sharing retail distribution, they're sharing other lessons that they've learned, what worked, what hasn't. And so there's just a lot of synergy because all the businesses are consumer facing and consumer product businesses. So they can realize a lot of learnings, but also a lot of relationships from one another.
And their customers are the same as the other guy's customers for the most part, with that
Right.
overlap that we were talking about. Yeah, I imagine you could get some really interesting synergies with that. I want to chit chat with you about after the program about it. What is the future of e-commerce?
I think it's going to grow even more and more. I mean, it's just so easy to just do like a Shopify click and have it delivered to your house, and that was just not even available a few years ago. And the prices are getting lower and lower, and it makes no sense to schlep all the way to the store.
What do you think about Amazon? Are we entering an era where retail stores do finally start to really die, or there's been a little bit of a resurgence?
But
God,
people to discover things, especially like things that you want to feel and touch, like produce, for example. I think people will still be going to the grocery store for that.
Yeah, things that offer an experience, will still be around, and retailers that don't focus on the experience and catering to that will continue to disappear. We always joke that, so Amazon obviously is such an important company that's just changed so many aspects of human life here in the US. But yeah, I mean, Amazon's going to continue to push the limits of e-commerce, quicker delivery times. So that should help further spur growth in e-commerce, right? The investments that these companies like Amazon are making.
But it's all for the benefit of the consumer. The consumer is driving that demand.
It is. I feel like what I'm seeing is separation of two separate things. So you're seeing a more high-end brand focus and a more lower-end generic focus, and the entire middle is being weeded out. I'm curious if you guys see similar.
Yeah,
Yeah.
That's a good point. So there's private label, which focuses on the best possible price, lowest possible price.
But a couple of our brands joined in and started private labeling for some of these, for like Costco or Amazon. So it's how fast can you jump in to beat them at their own game,
That is the question. So unique question / challenge for you guys. What's it like working together as brother and sister?
It's good. I mean, we have a lot of overlap on what we focus on, but we also do a lot of different things. And we get along really well. I mean, we've been in business since 2010. So
going 10 years.
So far, so good.
Right. And then, we sometimes I'm focusing on the qualitative and he's focusing on the quantitative, and sometimes it's the other way around.
Yeah. And I think when we were kids and we came here from Russia, both of us didn't speak English. It was very difficult to make friends. We were kind of forced to be friends. I think that developed a lot of trust, right? And in business, trust is the most important thing. So I think
it's good to have both perspectives of the female and the male, especially when it comes to consumer, because it's really split between 50-50.
Right. Half the customers are women and half the customers are men.
And maybe there's more women shopping for the male households as well.
And like you and I,
it's probably like 70 to 80% women and 20 to 30% men.
85% female driven in the food and beverage consumer. So not all consumer, but food and beverage, yeah.
And yet 3% of venture dollars go to women.
Well, it's about 65% of our companies are female owned or co-owned. So we do like to
we have a very high concentration.
The female entrepreneurs.
What do you find as the unique benefits of doing that? Not just because a lot of people talk about diversity, and I think there's benefits from doing it.
No, but they're really kicking ass in operations.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think they're really hungry to prove it, and the ones that are given the chance, I mean, they really outperform.
Yeah. Well, and the way that happened, right? We didn't set out. We didn't go out and raise capital for the purpose of investing in female-founded brands. We just, right after making investments, we realized we have a very high concentration of female-founded or female-led brands.
But they're starting products that the consumer demands. And if we just discussed on the food and beverage consumer, if it's mostly women going to the stores, who better to design the products for than women themselves?
Exactly. I feel like your LPs make you guys more flexible in what you're able to invest in. How do you suggest for investors or VCs coming up? So, for instance, I don't think you guys took any money from Saudi Arabia, and I don't think, et cetera, et cetera. But the people that you take money from influence, whether you wanted to or not, the investments that you make. And you guys have an impact investing focused fund, so to speak.
Yeah.
How'd you think about that when you guys were initially getting started?
So the way we looked at it, right, is we can make money in different industries, right? We can make money producing toxic chemicals and selling them, or we can make money producing organic food, right? We could also take capital from various different sources, right? There's no shortage of capital for a good deal.
But our investors are very much behind our mission.
Right. And
it's just to clean up the nutritional landscape and really disrupt the consumer.
How do you find those investors?
They're everywhere.
So I think it's just relationship, right? It's all about relationship building. I mean, right, if you're going to go meet with 10 different potential investors, right, like on 10 different dates, only one of those may end up clicking with you, right? And you'll see eye to eye, and they'll want to back you. And the other 9 may not.
You communicate to them,
right,
what you're behind.
So it's just about being out there and being in the community and right? Surrounding yourself in the circle that you want to be a part of, right? And so if you want to be the best investor, surround yourself with really good investors that you respect, that you think you can learn from, right?
And I think just by nature, I mean, if you can explain to them how they can make money, but then also contribute to doing good, I mean, and just by nature, I think a lot of more people would gravitate towards that. But you have to really communicate to them how they would also make money. But you would be doing that anyway.
But differently. I think some people would hear that and it would really resonate with them, right?
Of course,
I can potentially make money and help the world. And some people, unfortunately, they just don't care, right? They say, I don't care.
Yeah,
I want to make more money over helping the world. While others, right, may even say, I don't even care if I make any money. I just don't want to lose any money, but I want to change the world, right? There's so many different types of individuals and investors and types of investors and foundations, endowments, that you just have to, right? First, you have to have a solid business plan, something that makes sense and something that you passionately believe in, and then go out and present it. And you'll find those who connect and those who won't.
What about exits? So exits are super important for VCs because that's, generally speaking, your upside. And what we've seen a lot in the food and beverage space is most of the exits have to happen to conventional food companies. So like a Nestle buying an Honest Tea or something similar. What do you think about companies and their ability to IPO or go the distance when there are other companies that might not be as aligned as the sole acquirers?
Right. Well, there's actually, if you look at the numbers, there's more acquisitions happening in the private equity space than to a strategic or IPO.
Interesting. Yep. I wouldn't have expected that.
But so even companies like Nestle, Unilever, Kellogg, Post, right, Coca-Cola. So when they acquire brands, there's a reason they're acquiring them, right? And the reason is because that brand is doing something that they feel like they don't have the capability to do
or
themselves.
Reaching a customer that they currently don't have or lost. So it's like buying back their customer.
And generally, what these big brands do when they buy these companies is they leave them alone. Because so a big company like Nestle or Post or Kellogg, they're not like evil corporations. In fact, most of them want to change their offering, right? They put out their sustainability goals. They put out, like General Mills puts out all these goals of how much investment they're going to do over the next year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years into organic farming. But the companies, they're stuck. They're stuck because 90% of their revenue, right, is coming from these handcuffs. Right. So they can't, right, if they change where 90% of their revenue is coming from, it's going to isolate their base, right? They want to change, but as long as customers continue to buy these awful products, unfortunately, right, these are publicly traded companies. They have shareholders. They can't blow up the entire company in order to, right? And there's just not enough infrastructure to do that all at once. So what they're doing is they're making investments in acquiring these better for you products and investing in better offerings. They're cleaning up incrementally their existing offerings by reducing sugar, reducing the amounts of colorings that they add, in part because they know that that's right. Customers are becoming more aware of what they're putting in their bodies, and they want to offer what customers are looking for. But also because I think at all levels, right, at the individual level, but also at the corporate level, there is starting to build the sense of responsibility of, and consumers hold these big companies accountable for that as well as the stock analysts, right? What are you doing to make things better, right? Incrementally. So we don't perceive, right? We don't perceive the large strategics as, these evil big behemoths. I think they genuinely do want to make a difference, and they actually are investing a lot of money, not just in acquiring these better brands, but also making a deeper impact within their portfolio as well.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, their hands are tied to the wheel, and they've got to do the best they can with what they've been given. You guys are in this space. You're seeing the most interesting stuff. What are your health routines look like? Do you guys have any interesting biohacking things you're using, devices, things you're tracking, ways you eat, exercise, sleep, etc., that you think people would be interested in?
I mean, definitely, like I start my morning with a Vive shot, which is an immunity
same.
boost.
Vive Organics shot and a Toasty bar. Hold on.
When you say shot, do you mean like you're popping that thing in a butt cheek, or you're taking like a drink?
No. It's a little shot. Like think of the size of, like a 5-hour energy, but obviously it's not. It's just natural, cold pressed.
Ginger turmeric.
Well, there's different SKUs, but ginger turmeric is the one that Filipp and I are obsessed about. Yeah. And then these Toasty bars, I don't know if you can see from the thing. They're just the cleanest stuff.
It's a low sugar. Protein. It's an organic low sugar plant-based protein snack, and they're just amazing. Like, we got to send you some. Send us after the program. Send us an address for samples. We'll hook it up.
It's all protein.
In fact, you may want to speak to
5 ingredients.
Stephanie and Chelsea, who are the founders, because they're like just incredible.
The food tech stuff is super interesting because it is something where, sure, everyone has shoes, everyone has clothes, but we eat food every freaking day. And anyone that's willing to argue that putting a medicine in your body affects you should be able to, in my opinion, understand that putting food in your body affects you. Go drink a Coke and tell me how you feel after.
Right.
If you feel like you just got a little bit of diabetes, then you're ding right on. What technology or trend are you most excited about outside of the stuff we've talked about so far?
I'm really curious to see what they're gonna do with alternatives for fish or seafood.
Oh, have you guys checked out Finless Foods?
I have not.
Super interesting company. We had them on the podcast a while back.
I'm gonna have to try that.
Yeah, they're lab growing bluefin tuna.
And does it taste? Have you tasted it?
I haven't tasted it yet. I think it's a little too expensive for me to taste, but they're finally getting the costs down. Bluefin, tuna is very overfished. All fish pretty much are. We're going to have more plastic than fish in the ocean by 2050. But they're basically tackling the most expensive variety of tuna. And they seem to be getting it down there. I'm super interested in the whole lab-grown meat space because I do think that once you hit similar levels of price and you hit equal levels of nutrition, it almost becomes unconscionable to do it any other way.
Yeah, it's going there.
I think for me, the biggest thing that's at least on my mind and what I'm seeing this year is the elimination or reduction of single-use plastics. So whether it's upcycling single-use plastics into longer-term usage products, like taking water bottles and making them into tech accessories, right, that you're going to not use once, but you're going to use for the next year or two. Having more sustainable or plant-based packaging solutions, but that can meet the margin requirements, right? Because the bottle can't be more than the product itself, right? The packaging can't double the price of the product because then you feel warm and fuzzy, but nobody's buying it, unfortunately. So having an economically viable and commercially viable alternative to, single-use plastics, basically plastics that aren't biodegradable, I think is going to be a big innovation. Whoever cracks the code on that first is going to make a ton of money.
And pro tip, if you get one of those reusable Starbucks cups, occasionally they'll give you a refill as opposed to an actual new cup of coffee. So if you accidentally save $1.50, you didn't hear it here. I wanna jump to the lightning round now. How's that sound?
Let's do it.
Okay.
And guys, these are some rapid fire questions we ask every guest. If you support us at a level of $5 or more per month on Patreon at disruptors.fm/Patreon, you unlock this, some bonus episodes, you get rid of all of the ads, and you get the warmest welcome and thank you hug from the bottom of our hearts, because we've got to make this sustainable somehow. So now let's do it. It would be go ahead.
Oh, no,
Philip,
no.
what would you use your magic wand for?
No, I was just going to say, so, I mean, we support several different charities throughout the year, one of which is Second Harvest Food Bank, which provides actually food for children of immigrants, people who are like us that came and their parents were still being assimilated, right? They didn't have jobs yet. And then we also buy a pair of shoes for every single child at a local school every year. We pick a school where, over 95% of kids are on government assistance, and we buy them shoes. So I think, right,
But where's the magic wand?
Well, my wand would be around those two things, right?
But we're already doing that.
But one school at a time.
More money for shoes.
Yeah.
Got it.
I like Tom's model. Buy one, give one.
Yeah.
I would wave the magic wand and I would get rid of some of this thinning hair that I have right there first, and then do the more money part.
The secret to getting rid of the thinning hair is just shaving it all off and admitting that it's happened. That's what I ended up doing.
Whatever you got here, got it.
Yeah, just go for the beard.
Exactly.
Then at least you can tell. I want to jump back to the lightning round, back to the interview itself now. Do you guys do much in terms of genetic testing or anything of those nature? Genetic testing, biomarker testing, etc., to measure health?
Yeah, I do. So,
Yeah.
I mean, we don't have any investments in that space.
But personally.
Yeah, personally, what do you do?
So I do 23andMe.
I've actually done the 23andMe as well as food sensitivity tests.
Are you guys worried at all about the privacy concerns?
I'm not.
I mean, anybody that wants your information is going to get it either way somehow. So, I mean.
So the way that I looked at that, right, like they're going to collect my DNA, they're going to know everything about me. I'm not planning on committing a murder where I'm going to have to run away and escape, and God forbid somebody has my DNA, or right, like
I'm pretty
not that
proud
worried
of
about
the
it.
person I am, so I don't think it can harm me anyway.
Yeah.
Did you see the California State Killer? The Golden State Killer. Basically, one of his relatives did a DNA test, and then they ended up busting him for that.
Right.
Yeah, it's a little bit crazy. I will say that I am worried about that space. After I may or may not have done those tests using different names, I deleted my results and tried to get out of the database, just because I don't trust the companies, given the fact that Facebook will sell your soul for 2 cents and Google will do something similar. I don't necessarily trust the other companies holding this data, holding the source code of you. It can be a little bit scary, at least that's my perspective. But,
And look, that's a valid perspective, and I think there's definitely a lot of people that share that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not one of them. I'm like, whatever.
No, but it's true. I've had like some friends of mine, they're like, I will never do a DNA test to know my ancestry because I don't want, it's too unknown. I don't.
Look, I think,
Whatever.
at least from where I'm sitting, right, I think that when cars were being, produced and first commercialized, there was people that were saying these cars are going to be awful. They're not going to, they're going to disrupt the horse and buggy industry. What are all the horse farmers going to do? What are all the people that make carriages going to do? It's going to create more accidents. Right. There's always an argument to make over progress.
Ooh, let's play devil's advocate, though. That sounds really similar to what you were saying to GMOs, but on the reverse side.
Well, look, there's always an argument to be made against progress, because progress makes people uncomfortable because it makes changes. And some of the changes are positive, and some of the changes have negative consequences. It's always the case, right? With cars.
And there's many ways to go about them.
Right.
The safe way in the case of the GMOs, or non-safe with the pesticides. So.
Yeah. So I'm always for, generally speaking, right? I wouldn't say always, but for the most part, I'm always for progress, but in a responsible way, right? Or as responsible as possible.
Yeah, Zuckerberg, move fast and improve things. We don't have to break them all. I got one last question for you guys before you tell people a little more about you, your companies, where to find you. And that is, if you had to leave people with one thing, it could be anything, a quote, a call to action, anything you think would be beneficial, preferably something we haven't talked about yet, what would it be and why? You can each do one.
Want to do yours or?
I would just say, right, you only live once, and this life is, like, I believe we're all meant to experience life in a very full way, and just not to forget that. I always try to remind myself, just go out and take in what the world is offering.
And I guess my advice or quote would be, there's no such thing as a no, just a yes with conditions.
Or a timestamp on it.
You can always make things happen. It's just all about the persistence and how you go about it.
That's very
But
true.
There's been plenty of times I've heard no, and then I got a yes after a few other tries. So there's no such thing as a no, but a yes with conditions.
And follow-up emails are often incredibly helpful if you hear nothing. If you follow up enough times, just maybe you hear something. Persistence, that's definitely where it's at. Guys, thanks for coming on and doing this. Tell people a little bit more about you guys, what you do, where they can find you.
You can find us at cambridgespg.com. Email is just Polina@cambridgespg.com or Philipp. But we're looking at companies.
You can find us on LinkedIn, Instagram.
You're not that active on Instagram.
No, but we're there.
We're there. That's true. But what we're looking for brands that are doing 20 million plus in revenue, but still have a long way to go and need us to help them get there.
And are solving big problems and making people healthier in the process. Love what you guys are doing. Thanks for coming on, guys.
Thank you so much for having us. You gotta email us a good address for samples. We gotta send you some Toasty bars.
Definitely. And okay. There's my last question. How do you avoid the investor 15 when you're doing a food tech investment company and you've got people constantly pitching you with new food ideas? How do you avoid putting on the pounds?
They're all healthy food.
One word: Equinox Gym.
Equinox Gym. So that's
just
where all the
taste.
subscriptions are.
Just taste.
No. Right.
Yeah, you always wonder. You see those guys on Shark Tank constantly killing it, but they're also they probably got those tummies there as well. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for coming on, guys. And if you're listening, then go do something important and meaningful in the world. This is something where I feel like most of, if not all, the businesses you guys invest in are mission oriented, and I think that's a better way of building a better world. If you bake good into the bottom line, so to speak, it just happens. Yeah. Cheers.
Cheers. Thank you for having us on.
Yeah, and cheers, guys.